Today, we become legends.
Welcome to the complete guide for our Kuang for Season 8. I'll be returning to making a few single god guides in Season 9, so if you want to catch those as soon as they release, why not subscribe and help us on the road to 100k. But with that said, let's jump into the Dragon King of the Eastern Seas. As always, this video will be split into 3 basic sections to make it easier to understand. Section 1, the basic overview. This gives you a general feel for the god's playstyle and their strengths and weaknesses. Section 2, abilities in depth. This covers all of our Kuang's abilities, what they do, the best ways to use them, combos, and any noticeable other less obvious things about their kit. And section 3, items and builds. Here I cover the god's primary stat pool, general items, and a build example for their main role or roles, in this case, just jungle. So without further ado, let's jump in with section 1, the basic overview. Our Kuang is a mage, but it makes far more sense to classify him as a magical assassin. He uses melee basic attacks and has extremely short range on most of his abilities. He also uses stealth mechanics, has an execute, low AoE damage but high single target damage. Our Kuang's playstyle of diving the backline, focusing down one target and blowing them up before they can realise what's happening encapsulates an assassin. Don't be fooled by his mage class designation. Our Kuang's only viable long-term role is jungle. Our Kuang's strengths are his high single target damage, ability to kill tanks and squishies very effectively at the same time, very strong late game, and can pretty much hard carry games almost on his own. His weaknesses are very weak early game, prone to getting bullied out, invaded, or out-rotated by the enemy jungler early on, weak area of effect damage, and heavily countered by beads, Magi's Cloak, or just cleanses in general. His ult does almost nothing if they beads it, and he has no other CC to force their beads or Magi's before using his ult. He relies on his team to do that, which is definitely a huge weakness. Section 2, abilities in depth. Starting off with our Kuang's passive, the Dragon King's Sword. Every 12 seconds, our Kuang gains a stack of energy in his sword, up to 3 maximum. Hitting enemy gods only, not minions, will consume a stack, reducing the cooldown of the ability you use by 2 seconds, as well as healing our Kuang 5% of his max health. This passive isn't one you have to pay too much attention to in game, but don't ignore it entirely. If you're ever sitting on max stacks, try to poke an enemy god so you're not losing value when you try to gain your next stack after 12 seconds. But other than that, this is effectively a passive heal and cooldown reduction every 12 seconds. Our Kuang's first ability is Water Illusion. He teleports forward a short distance, becoming stealth and leaving a decoy of himself in his place. He can remain stealth for 5 seconds or until he enters combat. After 5 seconds, or if you reactivate the ability again, the decoy left behind explodes, dealing circular AoE damage and revealing our Kuang early. So this ability has a lot more depth than a lot of people give it credit for. Yes, it's stealth, but there are decisions you have to make when using it, such as do I instantly refire the ability to get guaranteed damage from the decoy, or do I stay stealthed? The decoy also faces the direction you were facing when you cast the ability, so often doubling back or veering off course after using this can throw enemies off, since they will assume you went the way the decoy was facing. Also, the ability doesn't go on cooldown until the decoy is exploded after 5 seconds or reactivation, so sometimes it's better to instantly refire even if you get no damage, just to put it on cooldown quicker. You can use this for camp clear as well, just make sure you teleport still within inside the camp's boundary or it will de-aggro and not take damage from the ability. This can also be used as part of a big burst damage combo using our Kuang's ultimate, but we'll get to that later. Our Kuang's second ability, Dragon Call, summons 6 dragons to encircle him. This ability effectively has 2 modes, basic attack mode and ranged throw mode. If you basic attack an enemy, one of the 6 dragons leaps to the enemy, dealing additional damage on top of the basic attack and then falls away from you. This is the reason our Kuang is built with at least some attack speed most of the time. Getting all 6 dragons onto an enemy quickly can be devastating, since this ability does 570 base and 180% of magical scaling if all 6 dragons hit. However, you can also reactivate the ability at any time to throw your remaining dragons as a ranged line projectile. This does slightly less than half damage per dragon compared to basic attacking someone, but has its benefits. Range being the main one. As mentioned in the overview, our Kuang's a mage, but he's a melee mage, effectively a magical assassin, so getting in those 6 basic attacks on an enemy is difficult. The ranged throw is basically your fallback if you can't easily get in for all the basic attacks. Less damage, but more consistent, and also applies a 30% slow that increases in duration for each dragon used. This slow is underutilized in my opinion, as it can keep our Kuang in range for more basic attacks, which is where a majority of his damage comes from. A trick I like to do is use 5 of the dragons by basic attacking, then throw only the remaining 1 dragon at the end to get the slow and stay on them for the kill. The slow is shorter than throwing all 6 dragons of course, but still very useful for only a minor damage loss. Also, similar to his 1, this ability goes on cooldown only when all 6 dragons have been used, so if you're not going to use some of the remaining dragons, just throw them at thin air to set the cooldown ticking. Our Kuang's third ability, Wild Storm, is far more simple than his first 2, don't worry. It's just a cone damage ability in front of him with a low cooldown, mainly used for poke and camp clear. However, this ability will also trigger a dragon from his 2, so in general you do 2 into 3 to engage from range, closing the gap as you do, and then use the 5 remaining dragons for auto attacks for the kill. You can also just 2, 3, then 2 again, and throw the 5 dragons for a big slow and burst damage. An interesting bit of trivia is that this ability used to count as a basic attack and activate basic attack item effects like Polynomicon. There was a long time in Ao Kuang's lifespan where he was built full burst damage with power, Polynomicon, and Soul Reaver, playing a one-shot playstyle, not the basic attack playstyle he plays today. Since a 2 into 3 into throw dragons will legit one-shot some people if you are fed, but yeah, not how it works anymore. And finally, Ao Kuang's ultimate, King of the Eastern Seas, is an execute. Ao Kuang grabs a target in a cone, knocking them into the air and dealing damage. However, if the target of the ability is below 30% health, you will instead reveal your true dragon form, executing the god, getting an up to 30% health heal. You then hover in the sky and choose a place to land, dealing damage again in a smaller AoE as you land. So this ability is really what ties Ao Kuang together. You only really need to burst someone down to 30% health, not dead, for it to be a successful dive because of this execute. As with any execute, don't be afraid to use it on tanks, since it actually gives you more value by doing so since it's percent health based. Being able to execute then re-engage is really nice as well, since you get a big heal and can choose a safe landing space in a gigantic area. You could also execute the enemy front line, then re-engage on the back line instantly from your ult, things like that. Generally, I would recommend saving your ult for executes most of the time, but sometimes that just won't work, and so it pays to know the ult combo for if you don't execute. It can still do big burst damage. Start, of course, by ulting but not executing an enemy. Immediately use your 1 to deploy the decoy where the enemy will land, like directly underneath them. Then use your 2. All that's left is timing. You need to reactivate your 1's decoy, use your 3, then throw the remaining dragons from your 2 all right as the enemy lands. And I mean right as they land, since they're not CC'd upon landing and can jump away immediately. This will deal the ult throw up damage, but not the ult landing damage, the 3's damage, the 1's damage, plus 1 leaping dragon and 5 thrown dragons, all in a very short period of time. This deals a total of 1125 base damage and 240% magical power of scaling, and is unavoidable if you're good with it. However, Ao Kuang's ult can easily just be purified on reaction as I mentioned earlier, resulting in just some damage and nothing else, so this combo is far from guaranteed to work, it's just an option that's there. Executing is still generally better because of the heal and re-engage you get from becoming the dragon. This combo also uses your only movement for just some damage, and that can be risky as well. Alright, so with his abilities covered, let's move on to Ao Kuang's items and build paths. Ao Kuang's primary stats are power, penetration, attack speed, and lifesteal. Look for items that give good amounts of these stats, perhaps with a useful passive too. For your starter item, all of the jungle starters are actually pretty viable on Ao Kuang. Eye of the Jungle going into Protector of the Jungle is in my opinion his go-to. However, currently Bumba's Spear is just really strong and Ao Kuang uses it well too, so in this current meta I would actually recommend going Bumba's Dagger into Bumba's Spear. The dagger is also just the best option for early game and gives you the most sustain and damage. Mannequin Scepter going into Hidden Blade is also solid for him, but his worst option in my view. You actually basic attack way less than you would think as Ao Kuang in the super early game, and going Mannequins makes you suffer a bit, but both upgrades of this are solid late game, just I prefer the other options. Core items. For Ao, I consider his core items to be Spear of the Magus, Ring of Hecate, and Typhon's Fang. Every jungle Ao build should have these 3 items in, plus your starter. We'll cover a full build order in a second. Spear is your early flat pen rush. Ever since they put lifesteal on this, it's so great for Ao Kuang. Comes with power, penetration, lifesteal, and a great passive since Ao does his damage in many instances, not one instance. He can more easily apply Magus with a small amount of damage before doing his big damage compared to your typical mage. Ring of Hecate is just a staple on most magical attack speed builds, especially ones that want lifesteal, which is great for Ao Kuang. Absolutely a core item for him. And finally, Typhon's Fang. You're building lifesteal on Ao Kuang no matter what, it's too good on him, so you may as well pick this up since even with just Hecate and Magus, you're looking at 84 bonus power from Typhon's passive since it counts itself. And sometimes you even grab more lifesteal than just these 3, like a Polynomicon or something like that. Typhon's also has 10% pen, which is really nice since Ao Kuang, as I've mentioned, can actually be a huge tank shredder with the right build. So that's his core 3 items plus starter. You basically now have 2 other slots to fill with whatever you like the most out of the options I present here, or even try something new if you want to. Firstly, Demonic Grip. Honestly, this is close to essential. I build this basically every game, but I don't necessarily think it's needed every game. If you're targeting only squishies or primarily squishies, there are better items than this, but if at any point you would need to actually do damage to a tank and execute him or something, you won't have the damage if you skip Demonic Grip. It's a trade-off. Telkine's Ring. A late game luxury item. I wouldn't call it core since it comes so late in the build and again isn't essential for a build that works. People rush this early game on Ao Kuang, but it makes no sense to me. I think you have a lot better options to go early game. If anything, you're getting this in like a 6th or 5th slot. I just don't call this item essential because it's my first item to go usually if I need a situational pickup. Hastened Ring, nice but not worth it most of the time in my opinion. It's a similar argument to Haste and Katana on Mercury. If you go in as Merc, either the enemy is dead in 1 second flat or you're dead in 2 seconds flat. Usually long chase downs that Haste is useful for don't happen that much. It's the same for Kuang. Hastened Ring's main use is actually anti-tank, since you can just stay on them with Haste and Demonic Grip and shred them down. It's a niche application though, and I personally don't go Hastened Ring at all really on Kuang. Toxic Blade, your go-to anti-heal on Kuang. If healing is causing you problems, get this. It has way better stats than Divine Ruin for you. Polynomicon, nice, but I personally don't like it. Back in the day when Poly procced on Hours 3, it was absolutely core, but since then, I just feel like the damage it gives isn't quite worth it, despite the fact that your engage is 2, then 3, then basic attack for dragons, which makes sense for Polynomicon. Its saving grace is the lifesteal it has, which is an extra 24 power from Typhons, as well as just nice utility. Poly is an option. If it works for you, then use it. It just doesn't really work for me. A melee attack speed god is a very different environment to a ranged burst mage with insane power. Poly is much better there than here in my opinion. Bancroft's Talon, similar to Poly, it's not that it's a bad item necessarily, but I think there's better ways of getting lifesteal on Kuang in the early game. Namely the core 3 items, Hecate, Magus, and Typhons. If you prefer the playstyle of Bancroft's, aka a bit more burst and lifesteal with a bit less attack speed and no Ring of Hecate passive, then you could drop Ring of Hecate for this. They fill very similar slots in the build, early lifesteal synergy and stats, but I think Hecate fills that role better, so that's the only reason I don't buy Bancroft really. Since Magus, Hecate, Typhons, and Bancroft is a little too heavy on the lifesteal for me and is easily countered. Before Hecate was added though, I did actually go Bancroft in my builds. Rod of Tahuti, an amazing late game option if you need that little bit of extra gas. It's expensive, but one of the best damage boosting items in the game. If you're fed and or feeling yourself, this is a great one to pick up, one of my favourite 5th or 6th slot items. Magi's Cloak, the only defensive item I would actually go on Kuang jungle. Only get this if you're getting CC'd all the time when you dive in, or if you're getting dived yourself and CC'd before you can find a way in. Owl has more damage than most characters honestly with just 5 items usually, so don't be afraid to sacrifice 1 slot on this to keep yourself alive. If you're doing 20% more damage but dying instantly in a team fight, you're not actually helping. Keep that in mind and maybe slot in one of these in 5th or 6th if you're having trouble. And a quick note on Stone of Foul, which is funny but not actually good on Kuang. It's good on other mages because they have ranged basic attacks. It's too hard to stack up Foul 3 times before full committing to a target as Kuang, so it's just a bit meh on him. For jungle anyway, maybe if you're trying to solo meme build Kuang, it could be good. But that's all the items I recommend for Kuang. Let's cover a build example for jungle. Your starting build is Bumba's Dagger. This can also be replaced by Eye of the Jungle if you prefer. Tier 1 Spear of the Magus, then 5 potions however you would like them. I go 3 health and 2 mana, 1 mana if I'm going Eye of the Jungle because it's 50 gold more expensive. Complete Spear of the Magus, then going to Ring of Hecate, Typhon's Fang, Demonic Grip, Rod of Tahuti, replacing Rod with Magi's Cloak if you need to. Complete your starter into Bumba Spear or Protector of the Jungle as soon as you get the chance. This build is a solid baseline that has everything you need. Plenty of lifesteal from the core 3, attack speed from Hecate, Demonic Grip and Protector of the Jungle if you get it, 10 flat pen from the early Magus, 20% pen from Typhons and Rod of Tahuti, 10 each. Bumba Sphere also gives you 10% if you build that, and Demonic Grip gives 30% prop reduction, so you can absolutely melt tanks with this build, don't be afraid to. But that's it for the complete Kuang guide and build. Hopefully this helped you out. Kuang is a pretty simple god to build with only a small number of viable items on him, but a very difficult god to actually pilot in game. If you enjoyed this guide, don't forget to drop a like before you leave, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on.